All right. I am back again with my friend and yours, Logan Christopher. This is, of course, the Hammercast, and I am Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin. And Logan and I were just talking a bit after the previous podcast that we had done, and then a little bit before this one, about a topic that I think is of the utmost importance, and yet almost nobody, I mean, everybody, and this is the thing, everybody knows it's important. Everybody like concedes that, and then nobody does anything about it. And I think it's high time we put a final nail into that coffin. And that thing is mental training, mindset training, and then also visualization and how to use that to enhance your training. So first and foremost, Logan, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a good topic. Excited to dive in.
Absolutely. Now, let's break it up into maybe, I don't know how you would break it up. My conception of it is that there's maybe three different things people can look at. There's mindset, which is maybe a general outlook about life and how you approach things. There's mental training, which might be how to kind of gear yourself up for a project or something at hand. And then there's like the in the trenches visualization or uh, we'll call it visualization. We'll just keep it simple for things like physical activities in particular, whether it's strongman feats to just kettlebell and bodyweight training. And there's like all the old school strongmen talked about stuff like this. The biggest people in business and in sports and you name it, all talk about this. And yet nobody really understands anything about it or really puts it into play. So from your conception and your approach to it, what is the importance of the mind and mindset and visualization and things like that in your training?
Yeah, well, as you're saying, there's so many quotes like the game is 90% mental, something along those lines. Which and athletes of every single sport will say something along these lines. So as you're saying, like everyone kind of gets that, they've at least heard of that idea. But the problem is that the mind is a slippery thing, right? And in many cases, someone says, like, you have to believe in yourself. Everyone knows that. If you believe you can lift a weight versus you believe you can't, chances are you're going to fall, or at least you're going to have a much better chance if you actually believe you can. Yet, what is missing in mental training as a whole is step-by-step processes. So we all know, like, exercise technique, you can get a coach and dial in the fine technique, but we can do the same exact thing with mental training. We have specific techniques that we can use that will allow you to optimize the use of your mind for any sort of directed goal, strength training being one of the possible opportunities for that.
So how do we do that? Because I can see that there are parallels, but I think a lot of other people, they don't think that they're even capable of it. You know, they think like, or they just kind of think that it's woo woo hippie stuff, and they don't see the value of it. Whereas it seems like the people who are athletes and the people who are hard chargers, it would seem that it comes naturally to them, but a lot of them actually do put a lot of emphasis on it. So like, what is a first step or first couple of steps that people can take to start putting it into practice immediately?
Yeah, I'll definitely dive into that. I want to say, like, we're actually all doing mental training whether we know it or not, because we're talking about the mind. So how you think about lifting that weight matters. You are likely visualizing, it just may be subconsciously, it may be done without your conscious awareness of it happening. A lot of people think they don't visualize, which actually is not true in most cases. And when I use the term visualization, yes, there's the visual component, but we also have the auditory, what we hear, and the kinesthetic, what we feel. It can even involve the smell and taste as well. So it's really a multi-sensory imagination involved. So a lot of this, it can be happening in the background, and it is like what you're saying to yourself, your internal self-talk. That is happening all the time. So there is mental training going on. You just likely suck at it if you're not particularly focused on doing it. Or some people actually just fall into doing some things right. They actually have successful strategies. So you can be possibly doing it well, but again, by consciously bringing awareness into processes and how to do this stuff, anyone can up their game, even if they're naturally doing some useful strategies.
Seems to be that in a way it's kind of like breathing, where it's like no matter
Yes.
what you're going to be doing it, but it's one of those rare processes where you actually have control and no control over it. Like it's going to happen no matter what, but then you can kind of steer how it happens. And so
Yes. very much
Here's
so.
an example, actually, because when you said that you're probably doing it without thinking about it, this happened yesterday, and I was getting ready to go to bed, and I heard a noise in the other room, and it was just like it's cold outside, so things kind of settle and move around or whatever. So it was, and it happens, but immediately I thought, what if somebody is in here, and I'm not, and I should probably just go investigate. So I went out, checked it out. Of course, there was nobody there, but in my head, the first thing that I was thinking was there was a sound that sounded an awful lot like what it would be if somebody were to have stepped on a certain floorboard or whatever in the
Mhm.
particular part of my fortress of swolitude, as I like to call it. And I didn't even hesitate. I didn't have to stop and think like, oh, maybe it was just this, that. Like the first thing that happened was because it was at night and it was dark and everything like that. Like my mind immediately went to that place. So,
Mhm.
it do you think that this is a good place for people to start? For instance, is when they notice what's happening automatically, then they try to steer it in a different direction, or do they start from scratch?
I'd say starting from scratch is probably a little bit easier because so much of our thoughts and our visualizations do happen in the background without us noticing. So most of what I'm going to talk about today is because I was trained in neuro-linguistic programming,
Mm-hmm.
NLP, and neuro-linguistic programming it's a huge field that covers so much. Really, I studied it as like, oh, this is great stuff. Let me apply it to exercise and fitness, which no one has really done, like maybe a handful of people here and there, but it's great techniques for really kind of being able to step behind the curtain in your mind and notice what is going on in those processes. So when you're talking about like, it sounded like someone stepped on this certain floorboard. So there likely was an imagination, like a visual of that tied to the external auditory sound that you heard that then caused motivation in you to want to go check it out. So this is a strategy that could be unpacked using that language. So what is really helpful is just to kind of start in real simple places. And again, depending on your visualization skills, and it is a skill that can be trained, you don't need to go too far with it, but just even working with some basic stuff can really be impactful in training. One of the places I like people to start is simply to visualize doing an exercise. And as you are visualizing yourself doing that exercise, just turn up the brightness of the movie. Um, and whether you're inside or outside, there's all these different things. In NLP, this would be called a submodality, the brightness of the image or the movie. Simply by turning it up, what seems to happen, my theory on how this works is that it's like adding energy to the nervous system. And what will often happen is just doing the simple thing of brightening the movie, people will actually be stronger. You can like eke out another rep or a little bit more just by doing this simple visualization technique. So that's one thing I like people to start with. Just in like 80% of cases, it's going to work to some degree.
Yeah. That's brilliant. And you know what? The great thing about that too is that some people hearing that might think, oh, well, that kind of sounds like an individual or like a personal approach or whatever. But it's a really a tried and true approach like that. That when you mentioned the movie, it reminded me of. I happen to have this nearby, Psycho-Cybernetics, one of the best books ever written on the topic. And Maxwell Maltz, who wrote it, he talks about the theater of the mind, where
Yes.
it's like you were visualizing, in addition to maybe visualizing your successes in the past to kind of get you amped up, also visualizing your successes in the future. You and I are both fans of Pavel's, and he wrote in his book Naked Warrior something about people who were it was a study done about people who practiced free throws, actually practiced them. A
Mm-hmm.
third group that did nothing, that was the control group, and I'm sorry, a second group that did nothing, and then a third group that only visualized practice. And the people who actually physically practiced the free throws, improved their accuracy by 24%, and the visualization group improved by 23%. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of people really discount just how far that imagination, or Matt Fury likes to call it fantasizing or pretending, make believe, like anything that because like you said, some people think they can't visualize. So if you use a different terminology, well, everybody knows how to fantasize or pretend or make believe. And it has such a huge impact that people completely forget about it. And I really like that idea of turning up the brightness so that it's like you can see it standing out in stark relief, and it suddenly becomes like you can call upon more of your faculties to do the stuff that you want to do.
Yeah, this was a technique, and I'll talk a little bit more how you can go individual to the person, because that's where it can really get very powerful. But what I found was that this was a common thing that you could just, I can tell this in a podcast. The person can take this the next time they're working out, just spend a little visualization right in the movie, and you'll likely see some results in that. But it can get so much funner when we go into the kind of finer details and find something along the lines of, like, you have a strategy, a mental strategy for an exercise that you're good at, and you have a mental strategy for an exercise that you're not good at. And when I'm talking about strategy, like, there is a way you internally visualize, even if you're not aware of visualization, but of how you may talk to yourself, what you see, what you feel within your body for something that you're good at. Oh, this is easy. You may say something similar to that and have like a rising good feeling in your body versus like, oh, I suck at squats. That is a strategy that is going to be there. And then we can take these, once we find these qualities, we can change them around. We can do some interesting things with them, and the result is it's changing our mental training, and therefore it changes the result that we can get. This is an example of how most people teach visualization, if it's taught at all, is the content, right? Just visualize yourself doing reps. And that does have use, right? So throwing those free throws. But here we're looking at the context. How are you visualizing? And realizing that there is tremendous power in how we change, how we visualize. That is where you're really going to get some phenomenal results.
Oh, absolutely. And what is the role, in your opinion, of your own self-talk? Because, on the one hand, I was just watching this scene the other day from Anchorman, where they're at that jazz club, and Ron Burgundy's like, "Oh, I totally didn't expect this at all." But and he goes up there and he pulls the flute out of his
yes.
out
Actually,
of
just
his.
watched that movie again the other day.
It's such a genius movie. Yeah. And then of course, so he's saying one thing. He's saying, "Oh, I totally wasn't expecting this. Like, oh, I don't know. I couldn't possibly." And then he goes up and he just completely rocks it. So there is, I think, a gap between what we say and then what we really think, but there's also like an overlap to some degree. So after a while, like if you were to tell yourself in the mirror every morning, "I am a millionaire," nothing's going to happen, because you're going to know you're lying to yourself. Now, if you say, "I am becoming richer every day, I am taking advantage of more and more opportunities all the time," it's a different story, because it's far more realistic, and it also kind of nudges you in that direction and reminds you to, whenever such an opportunity arises, like, this is what I talked about to myself, and there's no block of, "Oh, this is just me making something up." This is you telling the truth. So what is the connection between what you say to yourself and to others, and the carryover that has into your abilities?
Yes. So a few different subjects here to unpack. And you were talking about the different categories. I like to think as mental training as kind of this catch-all, then there's a different area. So we just talked a bit about visualization and the different components of that. Another area that's really important is beliefs. So a thought and a belief are different. A belief is embedded into your neurology in one way or another, to one degree or another. We have very strongly held beliefs. We have other things that we don't even think of beliefs. It's just how things are, right? And beliefs can be looked at for their utility. So even what I was saying right there, you have an exercise I'm good at, an exercise I'm bad at. These are beliefs to some degree, not super strongly held, but that is in there to some degree. So a thought, you can think a thought and have no registering of your neurology that this is true or this is false, right? So that is the difference between them. So when you say "I am a millionaire," when you know you're not, you're having a thought, you're saying that thought, but yes, it may be actually disaffirming because the feeling is negative, when what you're really feeling in the body is like, "Oh no, I'm kind of a crappy person that sucks with money," right? So that's a difficult thing with affirmations. So yeah, playing with the words, you can change it so that it becomes true and it actually fits and you feel good about it. That is one component. When we're talking about self-talk, we also want to look at the audio qualities of it. How are you saying it to yourself? So this is what I was just talking about with visualization. "I am really strong," or I am really strong.
Yeah.
Very different feelings, right? Same words.
Yeah.
These could be thoughts or it can be belief, but you'll notice the energy within these two just by the volume of the voice, the tone of the voice, the inflection on certain words. These change the meaning of those words strung together. So it's not just the words. The words would be the content, what I was just talking about, how it's said. And I was doing this out loud, but you're going to have these same qualities just within your head, if you
Sure.
notice, right? When you're just self-talking, that's going to be the context, and the context is, I'd say, at least as important as the content. So again, a lot to unpack there, but with that, we can then begin to look into beliefs, and there's a whole bunch of processes around changing beliefs and working with those. But this self-talk, so imagine, okay, writer image and find some phrase that you can say with power behind it. Let's combine those two, then go and do the exercise and see what happens.
Yeah. So maybe a good way of looking at that would be like, don't put any question marks on your teleprompter because you're just going to read them.
I was thinking that.
Yeah,
Nice.
exactly. No, let's talk too about the like the let's say the, how should I say this? Like the in the trenches approach. Just today, for instance, I was doing some pull-ups and I had it in my mind. I was like, okay, I want to do like one more rep than I did last time. I'm doing a particular protocol where that's actually a relevant measure of, the next step that I want to take. And so in the fifth set that I was going to be doing, I just wanted to make sure I did one rep more than I did previously. Now, obviously, in between sets, I would do stuff like stretch more forearms to make sure that they weren't going to just burn out on me and stuff like that. So I was taking proactive measures, but while I was doing the movements, I had a completely different visualization in my mind. It was almost like my eyes just glazed over, and what I visualized was not that I was doing a chin up, but that I was doing like a lat pull down. And that there were a couple of influencers that I don't follow them really closely, but sometimes I see their videos and I think they're very funny, like Sarah Safari and Brad. I don't remember his name. He's a big dude who thinks he can beat everybody up. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No.
But they're funny, and like their banter is always really good. And so it was like, for I don't know why I chose them, but I just had this the image in my head of like, them like either cheering or jeering, like like one of those two would kind of alternate between the two. But it always felt like when I was doing it, it felt like the pull-ups would happen just so much more easily. And there was kind of this like layer of different things that I was doing, imagining that there were, people cheering me on, imagining I was doing a far easier exercise, just like, light pull downs and what have you. And the combination of those things made a huge difference. And it has a tendency to do that in other exercises too. What is the role of that kind of training, even for the regular trainee, not just for the professional, but for somebody who is trying to stay as focused as possible and squeeze as much strength out of their training as possible?
Yeah, well, the name of the game is progress, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we want to have good exercise selection and programming in order to progress. That covers really the physical game. Now let's just layer on some specific sort of mental training on top of that. What you described there are a couple different tools, and that's the thing. There's no one right way to visualize. Yes, there's more useful ways, but really what we want to do is play around with different stuff and find what works for you. So imagining someone there cheering you on, there's like a motivation strategy that can add reps. Having someone there jeering you can, for some people, that's going to work better than the other thing, and vice versa, right? And you can play with the qualities, like different people may have different effects. Then we can look at the exercise. And one of the techniques that I like to do is say you're trying to get 5 reps, right? Visualize yourself doing 7 reps. And we can stack this with stuff like doing the brightening, the self-talk as well. What I find with that is just like, oh, you just visualize a bunch more, and the body cannot tell the difference between something vividly imagined and real life, right? So then it becomes much easier to get that rep you're going for. You may not hit 7, right? But 5 becomes easier, right? So I like to do that little overload on the visualization as well. I mean, it takes a split second longer. Why not? Then we can play around with more creative stuff as well. One thing I've done with pull-ups and chin-ups over time is like, just imagine having like a jetpack on, and then you just fly up out of the bottom of that. So there are many different ways, but you really just want to pick some things and run it as an experiment. You're doing multiple sets. So one time, run this visualization. The next time, try this visualization and notice what works for you, and then use those things more in the future.
I think that,
One other thing, you kind of mentioned this, what's really fun once you start doing this is your imagination comes up with stuff itself. Like you can consciously run this, but sometimes some powerful stuff comes through, like lights or different things that you didn't consciously do, but then you go ahead with it and you're like, whoa, that was powerful. What really happened there? That's some of the fun stuff that can happen with mental training.
yeah, the thing is that I think is really cool about it is that, like what you just pointed out, the individual nature of it. Like a lot of it depends on what is going to motivate you. A lot of it also depends on what you want to accomplish. But the other thing too is the surroundings. You know, like Dave Whitley, I remember he's talked about this when he got certified on the red nail, which for those who are not familiar, it's a really tough nail to bend in a type of strongman training called short bending. I think that's what it's called, correct? Or yeah. Um, and he talked about how he imagined he was in, I think he said he was in, I don't know if it was his gym or his friend's gym, but he imagined the people in the audience watching. He couldn't see their faces, but he could see the silhouettes, he could see everything else, the light, everything. He said that he would even imagine like the chalk that he put on his hands, and when he did that he would sneeze because the in his mind he had inhaled chalk dust, and so his body's response to that was to sneeze. And I think he said that when he went through with it, the only thing that didn't happen was the sneeze because he didn't inhale the chalk dust. But the really cool part about all of it was just that he was able to the body he's so well in tune to it that his body responded to everything at like such a high level of, again, like, do you think that your body thinks you're breathing in something that needs to cause it to sneeze, and then it just happens automatically. So people forget just how potent of a, we'll say, like sort of like a back door this visualization stuff is for your performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's so many fun examples of that. So in general, like to make your visualization more powerful, the more details you can bring in, really going across all those sensory channels. Now for exercise, the visual component and the kinesthetic component, like the feelings, those are going to be the most important too. But if you can bring in that auditory channel, a lot of information there. So yeah, something that can be quite useful is, yeah, imagining that audience around you and like the roar of the crowd. Who isn't going to get like jazzed up from that, right? Unless you're like very shy, and that's going to cause you to shut down, right? So we have to play with it for different people, but that can be a simple thing that you bring in, or just, you know, a lot of people use music for working out. You can just imagine the music going on. You can hear the breathing that you do as you do an exercise. All of these are different ways to bring in those channels.
Is there any way that you track like the effects of visualization and how it's helped with your performance? It could be, you know, obviously in your training, it could be in business, interpersonal relationships, whatever the case may be. Because I think one of the things people have a hard time with is that there's no, like, or seemingly anyway, that there's like no physical response once it, you know, the visualization is all over. You may have some sort of like a heightened sense of, you know, joy or whatever the case may be, or sadness, I guess, depending on what you're visualizing. But in my view, it's in some sense, it's almost kind of like improving your nutrition. It's like you eat better, and you know you're not. It's not like training where you get sore, you kind of feel a pump, you look at yourself in the mirror, you know, like I already look like I can see more muscles growing. And you know, there's like a for that, it's almost easier to get people to keep training hard, because there's a physical sensation that they can, that's more tangible. With eating, it's not very tangible. It's like you have to take that leap of faith for maybe a good, you know, 4 or 6 weeks before you really start to notice a difference. Is it similar with visualization? And if so, how do you keep people on track?
Yeah, a couple different ways. So one, I really do like the fitness, because we can see results right away, right? Visualize something, oh, I can hit another rep or two, yeah, depending on what it is. So that's a great way to prove that it works. I mean, it's really easy to understand that your imagination can affect your body. Just think of like sexual spots, right? Have a fantasy there. That's going to cause a physical reaction in the body, right? But yeah, so we can apply it directly to something like the set that we're doing right then and there. And as far as like tracking results over time, like, are you improving? And yeah, you may be able to improve in your workouts without any sort of conscious mental training, but we should see good results coming from that over time. So that's one way to look at it. Another big part of mental training would be just goal setting, and all that can go into that. So if you have a goal, whether that's a body composition goal, you're talking about eating there. I'll give this example. This was years back, but I did a strongman competition, like modern strongmen carrying stones and that sort of stuff. And it was just a small thing at a local gym, but I really wanted to win this. So my visualization for this included not only doing the specific feats that I thought they might be involved, because we didn't know the exact exercises, but I imagined them announcing at the end, Logan Christopher, first place, and going up there and getting the trophy. And as it turns out, I won that competition in my weight class, and I went up there, and what happened? A strange sense of deja vu. Of course, some of the details were different, but I still had this sense that, oh, I've been through this, because I've been visualizing that for 6 weeks, a month, whatever, leading up to that event. So that's a good, I mean, the result came, right? But then having that sense of deja vu certainly showed that my visualization was having a very real effect there. So seeing yourself hitting that longer term goal, it can be done short term, like that set you're doing right now, but also to that, I want to get to this goal, whether that's a strength goal or a body composition, whatever you're doing, everything in between. It's all going to be useful, but yeah, there's no point in just doing the mental training if it's just mental, right? We're aiming for physical results somewhere in life in doing this. So the results are the marker that you're getting results with it.
Yeah, you nailed it, because the next thing that I wanted to say was that some people also seem to want to they seem a little put off by mental training, because they think that what they're being told is, don't do any practice, just think about it and it'll come to you. Kind of like that book, The Secret, or whatever. I haven't read it. This is just my understanding of what people have said that it's about. But the reality is that you're supposed to use that as like a fuel to get you going, to start taking action toward it. And that's kind of like the thing that keeps you on track. It's like a guided missile. And then you miss your mark a little bit, so you get back on track, and whatever the case may be. But the mention of, you going up there getting first place, I bet that was on your mind daily, multiple times a day. And so, of course, that informs all of the stuff that you're doing, and then that reinforces other visualization techniques for, your recovery work, your sleep schedule, your training itself, of course, all manner of other different things. So no matter what, it's like people are going to imagine things, they're going to visualize things. People are just naturally very creative, but you can either let it run wild, in much the same way as your breathing, where you can just let it be completely subconscious, or you can try to grab onto as much of it as you can and then point it in a direction that is going to take you to where you actually want to go.
Yep, absolutely. One way I like to think, like if you set a goal, like a goal you really want, right? So the motivation is there, that becomes sort of a gravity well. So all these different things that you're doing, from the nutrition to the training to the mental training, all of that kind of builds towards that one point. Ideally, like, you want to be successful in it, but if you're not, that's feedback for the next time, then you can adjust and keep going. Yeah, obviously I've had like some success in the training world and outside of it, applying all this stuff in a myriad of different ways. But that shows that this is useful. A lot of people don't want to do mental training because it's kind of hard. Like we live in a very physical, materialistic world, right? We pay so much attention to everything that's on the outside without taking the time to really understand this mind and this body, the internal workings of it. But if you take the time to do that, it is going to pay off great results. I mean, everyone says this is like an important part of the game. Hear what I'm detailing, some of the details that can help you to do it in a more concrete, specific, more tangible way.
Mm-hmm. Any way that you track it at all? Like, people have a training journal. Do you track your visualization stuff?
Not so much. So visualization is just one aspect. Sometimes I would, like if there's certain methods or using hypnosis, we haven't talked about that. That's a whole other area of mental training that often layers in the visualization with belief change work, with affirmations of sorts, and different components of this. So that can be a great way. I really like a hypnotic track. I have several on my website, because this is like, as much as I can like do mental training for a person, all you have to do is like sit back and relax and listen to the thing, and you're going to be guided through the steps. As I said earlier, like mental training is kind of slippery, so it's easy, even though we've talked about things like, oh, I'm going to do that, but then you forget to do it, right? Or you just kind of let it go. So you absolutely can track this in your training. But for me, I've been doing it such a long time. It's part of what I do. So I'm like doing it before every set, or doing it when I need it, doing some extra things here and there, but it's really ingrained into the way I think and feel. And that's a possibility if you just, build in the habit.
Sure, sure. Any particularly, like, I want to talk about the hypnosis thing in a second, but do
Mhm.
any particular like funny visualizations that you've used? Like, I'll give you one that I've used just as an
Mhm.
example. I remember back in the day when I was doing more like splits training, I would imagine that Pavel was standing on my hips, like when I was trying to do the tension portion of it,
Yeah.
and that he was like, don't slip, don't, he was giving me like very serious commands, and I had to be like very focused. And I always found that to be very helpful, because having met him and having attended a number of his workshops, and then you see the way that people react to him, like they pay very close attention to him. So like just thinking about that, he's got this kind of air of authority that people pay attention, do what he says, and then they get the results. Have you
Yeah.
ever done anything similar like that that you found works very well for you?
Yeah, that can be great. One other thing that can be useful is just imagine Pavel in front of you, and then step in and become Pavel, and then do
Mm.
the splits. You can play around with this with a wide variety of different people, but this is another way that's just going to change different things. It's a little outside visualization, I would say, even though you're seeing the person,
Yeah.
but that it's a very useful technique. I remember a long time ago, I was playing around with pressing kettlebells, and I imagine stepping into Steve Cotter, small guy, but very explosive. And just without trying to, like, I'm pressing the kettlebells very explosively. Then I stepped into like a 250-pound guy, like much bigger. And how I handled the kettlebell was completely different. And I wasn't trying to handle the kettlebell differently. I was just accessing different parts of my neurology by imagining myself being these people. So that's another technique that you can work with.
Very interesting. Let's talk briefly about hypnosis, because you're right. I hadn't even thought about it. I don't really even have opinions about it because I know so little. Like, I think when you're a kid, you just assume that hypnosis is going to have a lot bigger part of your life than it really does, because
Yeah.
you see it in movies and TV and whatever. You just think it'll be everywhere. But what is it really? Is it just the power of suggestion that kind of gets people to lay down their subconscious wall and then follow instructions, or is there actually something where there's some sort of like an external force that's taking control of their abilities?
No, I think you nailed it with that first one. Is you're getting yourself into a receptive state, or the hypnotist is getting you into, but essentially all hypnosis is somewhat self-hypnosis, because you're choosing to follow the commands, or the directions of the hypnotist. So you're getting yourself into a receptive state, which kind of puts the conscious mind a bit to the side and allows better access to the unconscious, where we can work with things such as beliefs. With something like fitness, for getting stronger, like, you don't need a very deep level of hypnosis. Like,
Mhm.
everyone can be hypnotized. It's just not necessarily, a lot of people think of it as stage hypnosis, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that wouldn't work on me, right? And stage hypnosis is really a matter of selection, finding the right sort of people that are going to either play along or are actually really good hypnotic subjects, where it's easy to access a certain things. But everyone can be hypnotized. What it means is to lower these kind of things to access the different things. So with hypnosis, just lowering your state to where you're in a more of a trance, and then visualizing is
Mhm.
actually going to, one, just kind of increase the power of the visualization, and actually make it a little bit easier to do, because you're not going to be as distracted. So if we can amp up the power of visualization, that's great. we can use words, indirect and direct commands to play around with beliefs that will allow yourself to think that, oh, this is a much easier goal, for example. We can do anchoring. That's a whole other technique of really taking one state and anchoring it to something so it's easier to access on command. This is commonly done with various forms of psyching up, like smelling the chalk before you do something. Like that can be an anchor in and of itself. So we can use these different capabilities all together in a relatively short amount of time. And again, to get the end result that we're looking for, whether that's lifting a heavier weight or changing your body composition or winning a competition or things outside of the fitness realm as well. All sorts of different things, but it's a very useful tool that you can use. And yeah, you can work with a hypnotist, but it's also quite easy to learn the processes of self-hypnosis. One other way to think about it, it's somewhat similar to meditation. In hypnosis and meditation, you're actually going through the different brainwave states from the waking beta down to alpha, sometimes theta. Delta's really reserved for sleeping predominantly, but in these states, you can access a little bit more of the capabilities in the unconscious. So it's in many ways similar to meditation that a lot of people have tried. It's just with hypnosis, it's more directed at a certain outcome rather than the outcome that's commonly done of just letting the thoughts come and go.
Very cool. So in a certain sense, it's kind of like letting like a co-pilot in, whether it's a hypnotist or like a hypnotic track, like you mentioned, to sort of help you guide, like they're guiding your hand a little bit in taking your physical or mental activities to the next level. But it's like getting the influence from an outside source, not just let's say a self-perpetuated source, like what we would like fantasization or making believe or something like that.
Yeah. So one of the things to think about when you are visualizing or whatnot, if you have to both be the like coach, like being aware of what you're doing and focusing and doing what you're doing within your mind, that can be tough to do, especially in the beginning as you're learning this stuff. So with hypnosis, like having someone guide you, then you can just focus on the doing, the imagining, all those processes without having to be in control of what is going on around. So it's very useful in that way. That's, like I said, it's the best I can like do mental training for you. I wanted something that really stacks all this stuff. Like I've learned all the things. We've covered just the tip of the iceberg of all the different aspects of that. Can I pack as much as possible into like a 12-minute audio for a person to do towards some goal that they have? That's kind of what I was going for in creating these different ones, and have ones for like strength and endurance and whatnot. By all means, you definitely should learn the skills and to do it yourself. And actually going through the hypnotic tracks is a good way to kind of learn some of the things, because it's the training wheels, and then you're ready to ride the bike on your own.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, where can people follow you online in general, and where can they get some more information on the material that you have for using the mind to build might and all sorts of other cool abilities?
Yeah, so legendarystrength.com is the best place for that. Bunch of videos and articles, like there's a search bar and you can search visualization. There's like a visualization 101 article that's really good. Whole bunch of other material there. I have my book with Dragon Door, Mental Muscle, that might be out of print. I think it's still available. It's definitely available on the Kindle, but I'm not sure about the paperback at that point. That's a great starting point. That covers like visualization with the submodalities in depth. The goal setting or well-formed outcomes, anchoring and hypnosis. So that gives you a real strong basis of like much more than what we talked about today. Then there's some other programs available on the website as well. Just taking some of this visualization stuff further. Like one of my best examples, I actually did this at Dragon Door's Health and Strength conference many years ago. But I brought someone on stage and we looked at their visualization. It was that what makes an exercise easy and what makes an exercise hard. And for her, the hard exercise that she wanted to get better was one-arm push-ups. The easy exercise was squats. So I was just accessing how she her internal strategy for doing this. And it involved, I forget some of the details, but there was like a yellow light and whatnot. Like I accessed like 8 or 9 different points. Then we mapped those across to doing the one-arm push-ups. And she'd never done before more than 3 push-ups before. after we played with the visualization, granted this was on stage, so that was like the pre-frame that kind of made everything work better, which actually says a lot about mental training too. But she did 7 reps. Just yeah, pretty amazing. Like it doesn't work that good most of the time, but you can definitely get some great results just playing with the different techniques in there. So yeah, there's much more training available on the website for those that want to go deeper. And of course, all the hypnotic tracks that I mentioned, I think there's 16 different ones there. Those are available as well.
Very cool. So legendarystrength.com. Check out the search bar, look for visualization, visualization 101, and all of the other very cool stuff that he's got there. And definitely check out his book. It's called Mental Muscle: How to Use the Full Power of Your Mind to Develop Superhuman Strength. And that is available on Amazon. I got a copy. I got the Kindle version. I was, like I was telling you earlier, I was looking for the actual physical copy because you know, I don't know, I guess the Kindle seems too much like a nebulous thoughts like we were just talking about. So maybe I need to actually get over that sense that
I still like paper books.
Yeah,
I'm a paper
exactly.
book kind of person.
Yeah, likewise. So Logan, thank you very much for coming back on the show. It's been great having you.
Yep, it was a great conversation. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And folks, as always, have fun and happy training.